There is a specific kind of dead silence that falls over a room when 500 powerful people realize they are watching a monster get unmasked in real time. Last night, my ex-fiancé stood on an elevated stage under 1,000 blinding camera flashes, about to accept the highest architectural award of his career. Behind him, a massive 70-foot high-definition screen was supposed to play his glossy corporate tribute video. Instead, that screen snapped to black and the ballroom speakers exploded with the unedited, time-stamped audio recording from 3 years ago. It was the exact moment he ordered workers to use defective steel, watched a young man get crushed, and whispered to his billionaire father that they were going to frame me for the entire disaster. By the time he turned around in sheer terror, looking for someone to pull the power plug, the ballroom doors were already sealed by armed federal marshals. If you have ever been discarded, betrayed, or forced to take the fall for someone who had all the money and power in the world while you had nothing, hit that subscribe button, take a breath, and listen closely. The payback you are about to hear took 3 years of calculated patience to build, and every single second of it was earned. My name is Maya Lindqvist. 3 years ago, I was 28 years old and on track to become the youngest principal structural engineer at Sterling & Calder, one of the most powerful civil engineering dynasties in the country. I did not get that position through family wealth, country club handshakes, or secret trust funds. I grew up in a tiny, drafty apartment above a noisy dry cleaner in South Boston. My mother worked double shifts as a night nurse in an intensive care unit, and my father drove a city bus for 32 years. I paid for my engineering degrees at MIT with academic scholarships, late-night calculus tutoring gigs, and cheap boxed noodles. Math was my sanctuary. Steel, load distributions, tension coefficients, and concrete curing formulas were not just numbers to me. They were a sacred promise. When you design an 80-story skyscraper, you are holding thousands of human lives in the palm of your hand every single day. And then I met Julian Sterling. Julian was everything that generational wealth created. Effortlessly smooth, impeccably tailored, and carrying an arrogance so polished that most people mistook it for visionary leadership. He was the only son of Arthur Sterling, a ruthless corporate titan whose family name was engraved on half the museum wings and university halls across the city. Julian was handsome in that sharp, classical way, with cold blue eyes and a practiced smile that made you feel like you were the center of the universe, at least until someone richer or more useful walked through the door. We dated for 2 years. He proposed to me on a private terrace overlooking the Aegean Sea with a flawless 3-carat diamond ring. I genuinely believed we were building an unbreakable partnership. In my mind, I was the analytical engine who could catch a microscopic structural flaw on a blueprint from 10 paces away, and Julian was the charismatic frontman who could secure city permits and charm foreign investors. Our masterpiece was the Apex Spire, an 800-foot, 80-story eco-luxury tower rising along the riverfront. It was meant to be Arthur Sterling's defining legacy. But behind the closed doors of our private design meetings, Julian was quietly suffocating under his father's impossible demands. The project was 3 months behind schedule and $25 million over budget. Arthur had made it brutally clear to Julian that if this tower was not delivered on time, Julian would be stripped of his vice presidency and permanently removed as heir to the family board. I did not realize how dangerous a desperate, entitled man could be until the concrete began pouring for the mid-level structural transfer deck. On the night of October 14th, a brutal autumn gale was tearing across the city, bringing 60-mile-per-hour winds and freezing rain. I had spent 8 hours on the construction deck inspecting the heavy cantilever support anchors. The primary steel mill had delayed the delivery of specialized high-grade grade 80 fastening bolts. Because of that delay, I logged an official, non-negotiable hold order in the central engineering database. The order clearly stated, "Do not tension the lateral support cables or hoist heavy load beams until certified grade 80 fasteners arrive on site." I locked my station, went back to the downtown apartment Julian and I shared, and fell into an exhausted sleep. At 11:30 that night, my phone rang with a deafening screech. It was the frantic voice of Marcus, the night site supervisor. He was screaming over the howling wind, telling me that the main transfer crane had buckled. A secondary support arm had snapped clean off the south face, and Toby, a 24-year-old apprentice welder, was pinned beneath tons of twisted steel in the lower bay. My blood ran cold. I threw on my steel-toed boots, grabbed a rain jacket, and drove through the storm like a madwoman. When I arrived at the site, The darkness was sliced open by dozens of flashing red and blue emergency lights. Perms were rushing Toby into an ambulance. He was barely conscious, his face covered in soot and blood. He survived the accident, but he lost his left leg below the knee and suffered irreversible spinal damage. I pushed past the police perimeter and ran into the main site trailer. Inside, Arthur Sterling was pacing calmly, speaking in low, measured tones on a secure satellite phone. Julian was leaning against a drafting table, sweating through his custom shirt, a glass of dark liquor trembling in his hand. I demanded to know what happened, asking why on earth anyone was hoisting heavy lateral beams in 60-mile-per-hour winds without the high-grade fasteners. Julian refused to meet my eyes. He stared at the floor like a guilty child. Arthur calmly ended his phone call, walked over to me and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. He told me it was just an unfortunate equipment malfunction, that Julian had made a split-second judgment call to protect the schedule, and that the company legal team would handle the press in the morning. I told Arthur straight to his face that structural physics does not care about corporate schedules. I told him I had logged an encrypted hold order, and that the site records would prove the hoist was an illegal, reckless violation of safety protocol. Arthur just looked at me with those cold, emotionless eyes and told me to go home and get some rest. I went back to the apartment, believing that the digital logs would protect the truth. That was my biggest mistake. The next morning at 7 sharp, my apartment door shook with heavy pounding. Standing in the hallway were 2 process servers and 3 investigators from the state licensing board, handing me an emergency suspension notice. When I tried to log into my corporate laptop, my credentials were dead. When I accessed the Municipal Engineering Archive through a secure personal terminal, the ground gave way beneath my feet. The system showed that someone had logged into my terminal at 10:15 the previous night. My safety hold order had been permanently deleted. In its place was an approved authorization note carrying my personal cryptographic signature, certifying the substandard hardware and ordering the midnight hoist despite the severe storm warnings. Julian had taken my hardware security key from my bedside nightstand while I was asleep in our bed. By noon that day, Arthur Sterling was standing behind a podium on the steps of City Hall, flanked by reporters and television cameras. With a face full of sorrow, he announced that the Sterling Group had been betrayed by a rogue lead engineer who had falsified safety documents to trigger personal speed bonuses. Julian stood directly behind his father, wiping away theatrical tears. When a reporter asked Julian about our impending wedding, he choked up on live television and told the entire world that he loved me, but that no personal loyalty could ever forgive the criminal negligence that had permanently crippled an innocent young worker. In less than 24 hours, my entire life was obliterated. The media mob descended on me instantly. News vans parked outside my building, camera crews chased me down the sidewalk when I tried to buy bread, and commentators called me the cold-blooded villain of the city. The state board revoked my professional license indefinitely without even granting me a formal hearing. Arthur Sterling's high-priced lawyers filed an 8-figure civil lawsuit against me on behalf of the construction union, making sure that every single cent I owned was completely frozen. They emptied my personal savings. They seized the joint account I had funded for our future home. When I tried to reach Julian, his number was disconnected, and 2 days later a private courier dropped off a box of my old clothes along with a legal restraining order warning me never to contact the Sterling family again. My father, devastated by the public humiliation and the lies broadcast across the evening news, suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed on his right side. I had to move into a tiny, roach-infested basement studio on the city's far west side. It was December, the baseboard heaters barely functioned, and I could see my own breath in the dark living room. I had $11 left to my name, a broken family, and a reputation that had been dragged through the mud. For weeks, I lay on that thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, wishing the pain would just consume me. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. I had loved Julian with my whole heart, and he had thrown me into a legal furnace just to keep his father's approval and his family's fortune. But as I sat alone in that freezing room, the sorrow began to burn away, leaving behind something hard, cold, and entirely unbreakable. Despair makes people weak, but disciplined fury gives you extreme clarity. Arthur and Julian believed I was just an insecure scholarship kid who would hide under a rock and cry myself into silence. They forgot what I actually was. I was a structural failure analyst. My entire career had been built on finding the hidden microscopic fractures in massive concrete foundations and tracing them until the whole structure gave way. If they wanted to build a kingdom on a lie, I was going to find the exact pressure point that would bring their entire empire crashing down on their heads. I stopped fighting the licensing board in public. I stopped answering phone calls from reporters. To the rest of the world, Maya Lindqvist had quietly vanished from existence. Using my mother's maiden name, Vera Cross, I secured remote freelance consulting work for an offshore marine engineering firm based in Rotterdam. For 2 solid years, I worked 18 hours a day running complex fluid dynamic calculations and forensic blueprints. I saved every single dollar I earned. But more than that, I began my private investigation. I knew Arthur Sterling had one massive vulnerability. He was intensely paranoid about government oversight, which meant he refused to store sensitive construction telemetry on standard domestic cloud providers. Instead, all internal data from Sterling job sites was routed through an unlisted private server network managed by a third-party firm in Germany. Through a brilliant network security engineer I had known since our days at MIT, I spent 14 months digging into the digital records of that terrible October night. Most people outside the heavy construction industry do not realize that every modern industrial crane, automated hydraulic winch and primary job site command trailer contains a rugged, fireproof black box unit. These units are built with isolated solid-state memory modules designed to record local ambient audio, digital system overrides, and physical power spikes independently of any central network. Arthur's IT team had thoroughly wiped the central corporate servers, but they were too arrogant to realize that the physical site trailer from the Apex Spire project had contained a secondary uninterruptible power supply with an active flight recorder chip. When the project was finished, that surplus equipment had been quietly auctioned off in a lot of industrial scrap to a warehouse outside Milwaukee. It took me 7 months of searching through heavy machinery registries and $75,000 of my hard-earned consulting money to track down that specific rusty trailer component. When my technical expert extracted the memory module and bypassed the hardware encryption, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my coffee. The file was not just raw data. It contained the ambient room microphone audio from inside the site trailer during the exact 45 minutes surrounding the accident. The recording was flawless. On the tape, you could hear the wind roaring outside against the trailer walls. Then Julian's voice came through, high-pitched and hysterical, screaming that the hoist cable had snapped, the beam had fallen, and Toby was trapped under the iron. Then came Arthur's voice, cold, vicious, and utterly devoid of human empathy, telling Julian to shut his mouth. Julian could be heard crying, confessing on tape that he had sneaked into my room, stolen my cryptographic security key while I was asleep, and used my credentials to bypass the gale force wind warnings so the crane operators would keep working. And then came Arthur's chilling reply. He told Julian that Maya would take the fall. He said her name was on the digital override, that they would pay off the local safety inspector, settle quietly with the welder's family through an offshore holding company, and open the building on schedule. He warned Julian that if he showed any weakness, he would be written out of the will permanently. And Julian, after a brief hesitation, quietly answered that he understood. I did not take that tape to the local police department. Arthur Sterling had spent decades donating millions to local political campaigns and district attorneys. Instead, I took the authenticated audio files, the cryptographic hardware forensics, and the matching bank transfer logs straight to the Federal Department of Justice, the United States Department of Labor, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, who had already been quietly investigating the Sterling Group for overseas tax fraud and racketeering. When the lead federal prosecutors heard the recording, the room went dead silent. The evidence was irrefutable. But they needed a way to bring down the entire corrupt structure without giving Arthur's legal army time to bury the charges in secret settlement hearings. I told the federal investigators to be patient. I told them to wait until November 12th, the grand opening night of the Apex Spire. I promised them I would deliver the entire board of directors, the investors, the corrupt inspectors, and the media in one single room. November 12th was the most anticipated high society event of the winter season. 500 elite guests, including foreign diplomats, state senators, hedge fund billionaires, and national news anchors, gathered in the crystalline grand ballroom at the top of the 80-story Apex Spire. Julian Sterling was scheduled to receive the National Titan of Architecture Award. an honor celebrating his supposed genius in overcoming what the press called the tragic design failures of his disgraced former fiancé. I did not need to wear a disguise, and I did not need to sneak through a back door. 3 weeks earlier, using an anonymous corporate entity registered in Delaware, I had purchased the parent company of the private audiovisual production firm hired to manage the gala's live multi-camera broadcast. I was sitting comfortably inside the primary master control broadcast truck parked at the curb across the street, wearing a headset, calmly watching 16 high-resolution video feeds. On the main center monitor, Julian looked immaculate. He wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo with satin lapels. Standing beside him was his new fiancée, the socialite daughter of a prominent state Supreme Court justice. Arthur Sterling sat in the very front row, holding a crystal glass of scotch, smiling like an untouchable emperor surveying his kingdom. The master of ceremonies walked up to the podium, tapping the microphone to quiet the room. He announced that it was time to honor a true visionary, a man who had faced adversity and built a monument to modern ambition, the structural leader of the year, Julian Sterling. The applause was thunderous. Julian stood up, smoothed his jacket, and walked up the carpeted stage stairs with that arrogant, fluid stride that used to make my heart skip a beat. He stepped behind the custom walnut podium, placed his hands on the sides, and looked out over the sea of flashing cameras with a broad, confident smile. He began his speech by saying that true leadership is tested not in moments of ease, but in moments of profound tragedy. He said that when this project was threatened 3 years ago by what he called the reckless and catastrophic negligence of someone he once trusted, he made a personal vow to build this tower as a testament to honesty, safety, and unwavering truth. Inside the control truck, I looked at the master audiovisual override console. I took a slow, steady breath and flipped the red master broadcast switch. Inside the grand ballroom, the sound system let out a sharp digital pop that echoed off the massive glass windows. The 70-foot ultra-high-definition LED screen directly behind Julian suddenly died, flickering once before turning pitch black. Julian stopped speaking, blinked in confusion, and turned around toward the back of the stage, chuckling awkwardly into the microphone that the technical crew seemed to have misplaced his presentation slides. Then, through 40 high-powered line-array speakers hanging from the ballroom ceiling, a voice boomed out. It was Julian's voice, unmistakable, sharp, and dripping with raw terror. The entire ballroom heard him scream, "Dad, the bolt sheared off. Toby is under the beam." The wind caught the hoist. The entire room went utterly still. Waiters carrying silver trays froze in their tracks. Socialites stopped their glasses halfway to their mouths. News camera operators, realizing that something unprecedented was happening, immediately swung their lenses directly toward the center stage. Julian's face went completely white. Every single drop of blood drained from his skin. The microphone in his trembling hand picked up his ragged, shallow breathing. Then the voice of Arthur Sterling rumbled through the ballroom with chilling clarity. "Shut your mouth, Julian. Did you use Maya's security key to override the storm alert?" And Julian's voice replied, "Yes, I took her key while she was sleeping. Her ID is on the log. What do we do?" And Arthur answered, "We do nothing. Maya takes the blame. We settle with the family through an offshore account, pay off the inspector, and open the tower on time." The 70-foot screen did not just broadcast the audio. It began displaying massive, high-contrast digital scans of the internal server timestamps, the IP addresses showing the override originated from Julian's personal device, the bank wire receipts showing 6-figure bribes paid to safety officials, and the authenticated forensic reports signed by federal digital investigators. The ballroom exploded into absolute chaos. Arthur Sterling jumped out of his front row seat, knocking his chair backward, screaming at the top of his lungs for the security guards to cut the main electrical breakers. But the auxiliary broadcast feeds had already bypassed the building's local controls, streaming the entire scene live to national news networks and social media platforms across the country. Julian stood frozen in the center of the stage. His mouth hung open, his hands shook uncontrollably, and tears of pure, unadulterated panic began streaming down his face as hundreds of the city's most powerful people stared at him with a look of total disgust. His new fiancée slowly backed away toward the exit, looking at him as if he were a complete stranger. Julian tried to stumble off the side of the stage toward the private green room, but the heavy double doors at the rear of the grand ballroom burst open with a loud bang. A dozen armed federal marshals, accompanied by special agents from the FBI and the Department of Labor, marched directly down the main aisle. The lead agent walked up the stage stairs, spun Julian around, and snapped steel handcuffs around his wrists right in front of 20 live television cameras. Through my monitor in the broadcast truck, I watched Julian drop to his knees on the carpeted stage, weeping hysterically, begging for his father to help him. 10 feet away, Arthur Sterling was being pushed against a marble pillar, his face purple with rage, screaming threats at federal agents who did not even bother to look at him as they read him his constitutional rights. I sat back in my chair in the quiet control truck. I removed my headset, looked out the rain-streaked window at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the apex spire, and let out a deep, quiet breath that I had been holding for 3 long years. Today, the Sterling name has been completely chiseled off every building, museum, wing, and foundation in the city. Julian was convicted on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, evidence tampering, reckless endangerment, and perjury. He is currently serving an 11-year sentence in a medium-security federal penitentiary. Arthur Sterling was convicted of corporate racketeering and tax evasion, and their entire real estate empire was forced into bankruptcy liquidation to pay off hundreds of millions in penalties and civil damages. Toby, the young welder who lost his leg that night, was awarded a $40 million settlement from the liquidated Sterling estate. Today, he owns and operates a state-of-the-art training center that provides free trade education and adaptive equipment for injured blue-collar workers across the Midwest. As for me, the State Engineering Board issued a full, unconditional public apology and restored my structural engineering license with the highest professional honors. I never went back to working for corrupt real estate developers who treat human safety like an entry on a spreadsheet. Instead, I founded my own independent structural forensic firm, dedicated to inspecting large-scale public infrastructure and protecting the workers who build our world. People often ask me how I found the strength to survive when my entire world was stolen from me in a single night. I always tell them the same thing. A building never collapses because of a strong storm. It collapses because of the rotten compromises hidden deep inside its foundation. And when you live your life standing firmly on the truth, you never have to be afraid of the ground falling out from beneath your feet. If this story gave you chills and reminded you that truth always catches up with those who hide behind power, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have had the patience to wait 3 years to deliver a payback like this, or would you have handled it differently? Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story.